The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Be Christ, we got tanks up there. Let's follow a range on me, Christ. I'm doing around that on the target right now. I've got a couple of these right in front of me. I'm going out there. Right, I got him.
Welcome back to the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Tonight we're going to talk with another one of the staff members from DVG Games, Benjamin Chee. He is the staff editor on the DVG team. Ben, how are you doing tonight?
I'm fine, thank you. Glad to be here.
Good to have you on the podcast. So, people will probably roll their eyes and go, staff editor? Why do we need to talk to the staff editor? I mean, all he does is he takes the rules to make them look pretty, right? I mean, what insight could this guy possibly have to give us? So, I want to start off with kind of a leading question. What the heck does the staff editor do?
I edit the rule books and pretty much anything else that is published. So rule books, campaign cards, counters, box fronts, box back, basically anything that sees print. So we go over that with a fine-tooth comb, and we look for errors, typos, of all kinds. So grammar errors, historical, factual errors, formatting errors, and basically give the overall product a polish on top of it as well. So that's basically the main role that I do in the production of games. And in addition to that, I also provide rule support. So on the Facebook, on DVG Games Facebook, and on Board Game Geek, I'm generally the one who basically looks at all the questions that come on the forums, and insofar that I can help to answer or resolve some of the questions, that's what I do as well. So answering questions and providing rule support.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the latter. If people haven't tried to do that in the era of social media, that's a lot of work. So hats off to you for that, because I know the number of rules questions that come up on the DVG page. And then obviously I am not in the Board Game Geek forums as much as I probably should be as a podcaster, because I have a lot of other things I have to do.
Yep.
But I'm sure that becomes a both interesting and then wearying answering the same question sometimes over and over. But that's what any rule system kind of needs behind the scenes, behind all the glitz and glamour of cool miniatures or cool cards and cool boards. Somebody has to do the daily work of keeping everybody informed and on track.
I guess it's actually the way I see it, right, is we produce a game, we have a rule book, right, and the rules are as complete and as working as we can make it. So the game, fundamentally the game will not break, it will not stop. You will not play up to a point where you cannot resolve anything. The game basically breaks down. That should never ever happen, right? But the problem, of course, is when you look at a game like one of the Air Leaders or Warfighter, and you realize there's so many combinations of cards that you can play that you will get certain combinations or certain permutations in a certain setting. So I'm going to play this action card with this action card with this skill, but my hostile has this, but there's a cover there, and the rules, of course, cannot cover everything, right? You cannot try to cover every possibility, because then your rule book will be like the size of a telephone book, or worse, like an encyclopedia.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I've played those games. Those aren't fun.
Well, Starfleet Battles, I'm looking at you. But,
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, so that's a lie. I did enjoy Starfleet Battles, but I felt like I had to go to college again just to play the game, like Squad Leader.
Yeah, and I think I actually love Federation Commander a lot better, the pared down version. But anyway,
right.
But the way I look at it is, it's kind of like, in the legal system, you have the law, right? People who make the law, they pass the law. So this is the criminal code, this is the civil code, all of that. And then you have the other part of it, which is common law or case law, right? And these are the things that the law as written cannot cover, does not cover. And when a situation arises, it goes to court, and the advocate and the defendant system, they go and they argue it out, and the jury or the judge makes a decision and sets a precedent. So in the event that this happened, in this and such a condition, this is the precedent. This is my interpretation of the law. Let's and that sets a precedent for future cases, right? So
Absolutely. And
and
that happens in games all the time. Is what is the precedent? How have people ruled? Especially, obviously the Leader series doesn't have a competitive side, but especially in competitive gaming, when you sit there and say, okay, how have the TOs ruled in the last 5 or 10 tournaments? How do they interpret it?
Yep.
And that then becomes, in a sense, common law.
It is exactly that, right? So somebody will ask, I was playing a game and this happened, do I deduct this first before I make the attack, or does and the rules may or may not be clear around that. I would say sometimes the answer is in the rules, but again, to be fair, like if you look at Warfighter, it's an 80-page rule book now, right? It would not be realistic to expect every player to have gone through all of that and to know all of that. It can be quite intimidating. So, but I mean, I'm the editor, I think it's probably not a conceit to say I probably know the rulebook better than Dan does, because I have gone over.
I would
over
hope
the
you are
document.
as the editor.
Yeah, because he him and Holly will write it out like a couple, or like once or twice, and then I would have gone multiple iterations. I'm just trying to recall now on the Warfighter Universal Rulebook. I think I made 7 passes through it from start to end
Yeah,
before it,
absolutely.
So it's like, I don't know, it's like the Vietnam War, like trying to attack the Dragon's Drawbridge. You just keep going and
exactly.
trying to bomb it.
How many we
you
keep throwing
just-
things at it?
and-
We'll
and
eventually
now
get it
you-
right or get close.
Yeah, eventually you're going to blow it up, right? But but I would say actually, I've worked on Corsair Leader. I'm working on Zero Leader right now. I've worked on the last 3 Warfighters. I worked on by Stealth and Sea, and I think on every single one, just looking at the rule book, I probably made an average of between 4 to 6 end-to-end passes, and this is not counting, just picking up bits and pieces here and there. We found something here. Please fix this. Please, or please clarify this. I think I made, on average, each rulebook I've gone through it about 4 to 6 times, end to end. So it actually
be kind to my input to Zero Leader, my one optional rule. So I kind of wrote it as Chuck and I were talking off the cuff, and I'm like, yeah, this is kind of what the intent of what I think would be really cool. And then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I think I'll put that in as an optional rule. I'm like, I probably should have wordsmithed that better. Benjamin's going to look at that and go, what idiot from Alabama wrote this? This isn't even proper English.
But that's what I've actually told Chuck. So I think I've been working on Zero Leader for about the last 6 months now. It's August. I think I started in February. I know Chuck and Kevin probably started a bit earlier than that in terms of thinking about it. But actually very early on, Chuck actually came to me. He called me up, introduced himself, and we spoke a bit. And he said, no, Kevin said, come and talk to you before I start writing the rulebook. I said, sure. Like, here's a couple of thoughts, and this is what you need to do. But one of the things I told Chuck was, focus on the mechanics, focus on the rules, focus on what you want to do. Make sure there's the clarity in your mind. Don't worry about beautifying the language. We will fix that. Because the rules are in flux anyway. You don't have to make the rules pretty now. It just has to make sense, and it has to work.
And that's the difference between DVG and Warlord, because if you don't edit something for Warlord before you send it to them, they won't be editing it either. So we appreciate a company that actually does some editing.
That sounds pretty treacherous, actually. That's like dangerous.
It's funny. It is dangerous, and we laugh in the systems that we work with Blood Red Skies, Cruel Seas, Bolt Action, some of those. It is funny to see where the effort is put in, and every company is going to do it differently. As people make fun of Games Workshop for not playtesting things and for just playtesting rules by publishing them, we kind of make fun of Warlord for not proofreading anything and for spending more time putting in pictures or pretty text boxes and not proofreading simple things like the proper spelling of Lieutenant Commander Thatch's name in the Thatch weave and not spelling it like the thatch you would put on top of a roof.
Yeah.
And things like that. It's just funny to see what gets past a variety of editors. And I guess my background of having to edit too many documents in government service, I tend to try to concentrate and catch those things first, just out of my own anal retentive personality, wanting to make sure that I's are dotted, T's are crossed. And then I'll get to the rules at some point.
I mean, here's the thing, right? You have people who design games, and their creative thinking is brilliant, right? They've come up with this mechanic, this concept, this idea. I mean, I was just talking to a colleague earlier today about the Peloponnesian War and this mechanic where you play one side until it gets too powerful, and the game makes you switch to the losing side. And like, wow, how do you do that? You actually change sides if one side becomes too dominant, which is extremely mind-boggling. But here's the thing, right? Game designers are game designers. They may have designed a brilliant game and everything in their mind is clear as a unity. But writing a rulebook is a form of technical writing. And technical writing is hard. It's actually not that easy. That's why you have specialists.
No, and it's not fun. There's nothing fun like it is in game design.
Yeah, if you're not a technical writer, it is not fun. So, but it is a form of technical writing, and it actually can be difficult to express a concept that is very clear in your mind in 3 or 4 dimensions even, and I have to put this down in English on a piece of paper and explain it in a way that's clear, unambiguous, and can be understood by somebody else. And you very quickly realize, right, that your audience, your readership, really has such a diverse level of reading ability.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and sometimes, when I see a certain rule, I say, I understand what you're trying to say here, but will somebody else understand what you're trying to say here? So let me try to rephrase it. Let me try to, reword it. And sometimes it ends up being a bit more long-winded, but
right.
Again,
but at least it covers the bases. It makes it obvious what the intent is.
But you have to balance it, because legal documents are long-winded because they have to be. They have to be absolutely precise in specifying or describing that term or condition. Which is like describing a rule, right? But then that's why you have lawyers who are very good at reading that kind of technical document.
Exactly.
But your average reader, your average player may or may not have the ability to read it, and they might be confused. They might take a guess at it. And of course, you have people who just like, I am going to just skim through it and watch a couple of videos, and then I'll just ask questions online. Which is fine,
which I think is kind of where we are in the gaming world today. Is there's so many people that are going to buy a game, hit YouTube up, look at somebody's playthrough of a couple of parts of the game, and that is how people consume games now. I find it funny every once in a while, and I'll use my frame of reference, Blood Red Skies, how many people from my generation or older who aren't used to doing that, they'll show up and say, hey, wow, these rules are kind of confusing. And literally the first question we all ask is, did you go look at YouTube for a playthrough? And they're like, oh, why would I do that? I'm like, because that's how the rest of us all consume games now. We look at it and go, I didn't understand that. There's not necessarily a frequently asked questions on the site to cover that. How am I going to do this? And we just go find a playthrough and it explains it.
Yeah, I would normally advise, players that if you want to watch a playthrough, do it with caution, because one, you don't know if the people making the video, right? You don't know if the people making the video actually got the rules right. And two, and this happens quite often, more often than you think, right? If let's say it's a review, so the game hasn't been officially published, or the game is in publication, but it's not been released.
Right.
So we send customize and print and play counters and components out to some of these bloggers to make a preview video, right? So they are using possibly an earlier iteration of the rule, if not
Exactly.
components. So and sometimes you do get last minute changes, not very much, and I try to lock it down on Dan and Kevin as much as I can to say, are you sure you absolutely want to do this now? Like, and then yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah. There's
we
sometimes there's a problem of getting the information out too early that people play a pre-release version and they go, "Oh, this is either great or it's terrible," and something changes
yeah, I
dramatically.
mean, we've had people, preview Warfighter Shadow War, and then people who then bought the game and watched the video and said, "Oh, look, the bot's different. The bot's like completely different." Yeah, I think
Yeah,
because,
and that's a risk you're going to have in the current era to get things out and to get people to review stuff ahead of time, and then suddenly you realize partway through your development that, oh wait, we need to change that. That's not how we wanted that mechanic to work, and it could be a core piece of it, like the bot,
yeah,
like the
yeah,
AI.
but I do have to point out though that these are not last minute. I mean, definitely not frivolous, but these are not like last minute change of mind. It's usually there's a mechanic, we can do it this way or we can do it that way, and either way actually works. And we have tested both, and we're just, one is better than the other. We just can't make that determination until like at the very, very, very last. Like this is the near final production copy. You have to make a call, which do you think works better? Because we've play tested both, and there's very
Yeah,
little to
yeah,
separate one from
absolutely.
the other. So, okay, let's lock it down. Let's do this. Let's do A, but the preview version may have used B, and then
Well,
that confuses people because people
it
read the book, they
does.
watch the
It
video, and they
does.
say, why is the rule not like the video? And what did you see when the video was timestamped? And but this actually brings me to another, I guess, it's a nice segue to another point that rules actually do evolve as well. Obviously we don't change rules as we go, like it's not arbitrary. But for example, if you look at Warfighter, and the way the game expanded from its origins in, Warfighter Modern, and then, the European theater, the ETO, and then the Pacific. And every time I think that Dan has released a new iteration of Warfighter, he's always wanted to add something new. Like this is not just a reskin of the previous one. It's not like we just took all the soldiers and changed all of them from, I don't know, Third Army GIs to, US Marines in the Pacific. Like let's introduce something new. Let's put a new mechanic in. Let's introduce a new concept. Let's introduce this thing called Hardy, for environment. Let's put, and to kind of expand the rule set and expand the gameplay. So what happens is that the rules actually evolve. You know. So
Absolutely, and I've seen it in the leader series, especially the air leader series piece, which is both wonderful and frustrating to me because I love when Chuck and I were discussing some of it offline and talking about some things that I hold sacred in the old original Hornet leader and Thunderbolt Apache leader from years ago under GMT's brand that
mm,
didn't make it into the later DVG versions. The things that he and I talked about doing. I think it's awesome. My frustration is there's times that I really wish they were backfit to the parts of the series that I love, like Hornet and Phantom Leader. And so, playing Hornet and not feeling more on rails in that game than I do when I pick up Corsair or play through some stuff in Zero Leader. And I sit there and go, when can I get these things re-released with with these updated rules? Because they're cool mechanics and they're things that I think sure they make the game more complex, make it a little bit slower, but they add the taste or the flavor of aviation that I think when you go to kind of the first part of the series to Hornet Leader just isn't there. I mean, all of a sudden it's a bunch of pointy nosed airplanes that may have different descriptions and different weapons loads, but they don't feel as different as when you get to Corsair Leader and Zero Leader as some of the aircraft do. So I think that's always a challenge for you guys to figure out when to backfit things.
yeah, I think, I mean, when I remember, like again when we were talking about Zero Leader, you know in the early stages, 6 to 8 months ago. And I remember, I mentioned this. I told Chuck, like, think about what you want to do, and rather than just look at Corsair Leader, start from scratch, start from nothing, write the rules from the ground up. I mean, you can use Corsair and Hornet and the other rules as a reference, but start from the ground up and build it up from there. And as you build it up, put your own things in. So Chuck has talked about his mechanics and all the new things that are going into Zero Leader. And I think that's really the cutting edge of the innovation of the game. So it's familiar enough to people who have played Corsair or one of, I guess, Hornet or Phantom or IAF leader, the leaders with the aircraft. So it's close enough to be familiar, and a lot of the concepts are still there. The fast and slow aircraft. The use of in Zero Leader it's called Samurai Spirit, but it's the equivalent in Corsair Leader is Gung Ho, right?
Gung Ho, exactly. Gung Ho. I'm all excited that there's an equivalent to that.
you can do. But then he's also added other things. The resilience of the planes, the robustness, the mechanics. Everyone has asked about the kamikazes. I don't know why, but
it's a cultural thing. I don't know why. It's like you can take the entire Pacific War and boil it down to kamikazes for some people, and that's the mechanic they want, because they've asked the same thing in Blood Red Skies. They're like, hey, so what trait card do I use to simulate kamikaze? I'm like, I don't know, man. Somebody call Andy and ask him, because it doesn't make sense. I don't care about that in my Pacific battles.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, how are you going to make this work? Because the Japanese forces basically they resorted to kamikazes when they were losing. You generally don't sacrifice your pilots.
Yeah, you're not going to start off with that on day one.
Yeah, so you have to find a way to make it work in the game, right, without penalizing the player. But the player you'd have to be like pretty desperate to be using a kamikazes in order to, I don't know, like get the victory points or to destroy the American carrier or whatever. It.
And I think that's what fascinates me the most with Zero Leader. And I've talked to Chuck about it. I talked to both Dan and Kevin about it. Is that I am curious. Not so much curious yet to have actually jumped into the Kickstarter. I'm sure I will. But I am curious enough to want to know, how do I simulate that period of time, reward the player for making tough choices, but don't make it feel like no matter what your act of desperation, you're still going to lose the game, and how have you tweaked the victory conditions and things to, even though you're inevitably losing the war on a machinery level at this point, just sheer numbers, how do you at least get through and say you did the best you could with what you were handed?
Yeah, but I mean, to his credit, I know Chuck has done a lot of reading up, a lot of research, a lot of, I think more importantly, synthesizing what he's read, drawing on his experience as, a veteran player of DVG games, and then synthesizing in his mind, this is what Zero Leader is going to look like. It's almost like, I don't know, I'm just thinking of an analogy from the movies. You've always had the same 2 or 3 directors do this movie of a franchise, and then let's just get this totally different, not even Maverick, but just completely
I was just going to say
different
J.J. Abrams and Star Trek. That to me, if it changes that much, then I will be happy. And I'm not saying that as a spear against DVG Leader Series games, but I think it will take it in a totally new, different direction.
That's not a bad analogy, actually, because every director, or in this case, every designer brings his or her own sensibility, his own creativity, his own ideas. And, credit to Dan that he was confident, and I guess, what's the word for it? He was, he was confident enough to say, look, Chuck has a very good idea behind what he's describing. He needs to work it out, but we will support him, but let him run with that. And Kevin will backstop him on the one hand, and Ben will backstop him on the other hand. So Chuck is not completely alone. It is still a team effort, but it's also Chuck's effort. And let's put it all together, And I think they lucked out as well, because like I said, I actually come to this as a Japanese high school exchange student, so I actually speak the language, and I can advise on that. So it was so funny. I think initially, for example, this is a funny story. They came up with a list of pilots' names, right? And of course, Chuck said, or I think Kevin or Chuck said, no, should we put the Japanese characters? Should we put the kanji in for the names, for flavor? I said, why not? If you want, I'm happy to do the translation for you. So we put the pilots' names in there. You know, Ogawa, and then I can give you the kanji for that. The Chinese characters which are used in Japanese and very specific pronunciation as the family name, right? Ogawa. So I can give you that. Like that's easy for me. So I think initially they went and researched and they came up with a list of, pilots' names. Like these are going to be all our pilots. And I looked at them and said, okay, these are fine. I can translate this. There's a whole bunch here that's really strange. These are not necessarily wrong, but they aren't very common Japanese family names. No, these are really, really uncommon. I guess the equivalent might be, oh, let's look at some American GI names. We have Jones, we have Smith, we have Taylor. Oh, and we have a Szymanowski.
Then you have Rabinowitz.
Yeah, we have a
Yeah,
Rabinowitz,
exactly.
and then we have a Jacquino. Like, okay,
Yeah,
that's not to
exactly.
say
Like how?
we wouldn't have a Jacquino or a Rabinowitz, but Jones and Smith is more common, more mainstream.
And so at least the funny thing for me, for having spent too much part of my life in Japan, and I love being in Japan. I love the culture. I am
Yeah.
absolutely horrible at navigating my way around because of the interface of katakana, hiragana, and kanji all together. And just when I
Yeah.
think I know what something says, I look at it and go, why is there one character I don't recognize? Because I haven't studied well enough.
Yeah, there is
more
that.
power to you doing all that.
But it was so funny because I remember I pull out a whole list of names and I remember telling Chuck, you cannot use these names, these have to change, right? Like over here there's a Minami. Minami is a
Yeah.
girl's first name. Never, not in
Yeah.
not in any universe would you have a Japanese pilot in the World War II called Minami. That.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So and I think I ended up, and he said, you know what, smart Alec, you give us the names, so I think I think today I've probably given them like maybe 70 or 80 names. I think I probably named like
That's a cool level of detail. Things that are both culturally and at least within the rails of what you can determine would be historically correct are pretty
I mean,
accurate. Because you always have to. You need filler in a leader game of call signs, names, things like that.
No, we've done. I think we've tried to. So the thing is that we've pulled out all the stops on this for Zero Leader. So we've got a new designer in with a breath of fresh air, like very good solid ideas that builds on Corsair Leader. It builds on the lessons we learned from Corsair Leader. It builds on the things we know worked and we liked on Corsair Leader, right? And we look at all the feedback. We don't necessarily always respond because sometimes I honestly don't know how to respond to this without making it sound antagonistic or sounding like we're picking a fight, but we get it. We hear your anguish, we hear your frustration, we know what's wrong, and we see all of that feedback, right? So we took all of that, we distilled all of that, and we're trying to make it as good as we can. And it's not just it's a better gameplay. You have more planes. I think more aircraft types, more campaigns. We are trying something new with the rulebook, for example. So I actually Chuck and I were speaking, I think last week, and I said, how about this? Let's put in some quotations just for flavor. And so now, and we, I pulled out maybe 12 or 15 different quotations from Miyamoto Musashi,
Right.
And his book of Five Rings, and
Exactly. I have
and
a
we put
copy
the
right
quote-
behind me.
and we put some of the quotes in there, just for flavor, just to add to that what's the word for it?
If you don't understand samurai spirit and some of those thinkings, you're not going to understand why the air forces, and I'll say that of both the Army and the Imperial Japanese
Yeah.
Navy, acted the way they did and the things they did. And it's fascinating to me to watch Chuck work through some of the things and talk through some of it, and to see that there's a historical understanding that I think sometimes has been missing from at least the Air Leader series. To dig a little bit deeper and to not just take it on the top level historical summaries, but to really dig in and ask the question of why. Why were these aircraft used, or why were these aircraft seen as not very effective because they should have been, if you look at them, just the pure capabilities, and what led the Japanese to not use them effectively sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we actually started out, we were just kicking the idea around, and I just made a few things up, like, I don't know, the enemy shouts, but the mountain remains silent. Something that sounds kind of profound, but and
Yeah.
I'm thinking, look, if you're going to quote, let's go quote from the best. Let's just go to Miyamoto-san and let's get some of his authentic things in and
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
where it
Exactly.
fits in the rules and just do that. I think that even extended to the design of the cover. I don't know if you remember the initial design of the Zero Leader box was actually kind of a khaki green.
Yep. Yep. That
And
that
then
was my favorite, but that's okay. You guys have gone through a
and
couple
then
revisions, but yes.
it went to the fire truck red, and then it went to the red cross red and white,
Yeah.
and then
Okay. I
it
was about to say.
finally
So the bright red was not my favorite.
it I remember telling Chuck, although red kind of suits the theme because of the Japanese rising sun and the color, but consider this: 6 months from now, when the game is out and sitting on the shelves, you're going to look at your shelf of all your leader games, and the leader games are predominantly blue, brown, and green. It's one of these three colors, and then you have this fire truck red
Yeah.
sitting there, sticking out like a sore thumb. You will look at it and you know you will weep. Although, and then I think we played with it a bit and muted it down, and I told him, look, it's perfectly all right if it comes off this pinkish, this salmon pink, because here's the thing: when you see pink, right, in the context of Japanese culture, the first thing that comes to mind is the cherry blossom,
Cherry blossoms.
the
Exactly.
sakura, the cherry
I was
blossom,
going
right?
to preempt you and say that.
Yeah, exactly. It's very emblematic of Japanese culture. And here's where it links back to the game, right? The Suicide Plains, the Oka, is Japanese for cherry blossom.
Exactly.
The
Exactly.
Kamikaze Plains were
I,
called cherry blossom. Yeah. So
I
that,
think for people who have not spent time in Japan or spent, really delved into Japanese culture, I think it's interesting for them not to always catch some of the connections that are there because it's a very complex and very different way of looking at the world. And so when Westerners jump in and they think of the iconography or things like that, they don't always think about the things that are intuitive to us color wise and are different in even different countries in Asia, but especially in Japan. I always tell the story of eating soft serve ice cream and being an American and walking in there and thinking you know what flavors you're going to get. And you're like, oh, that's going to be grape or that's going to be orange. And it's either cantaloupe or, red bean flavor, all these other funny things that you're just not
yeah,
expecting in the Western palate
I
because you chose by color.
black mochi or or
Oh
green
God,
tea.
yes. Oh yes, yes. Well, and green tea is the other funny one. Like, oh, this is going to be lime, and you're like, that is not lime. Although, then we could always, throw in the Malaysia Singapore favorite of durian, and we could we could add that flavor in. Oh,
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I think for something as exotic, if that's the word for it, as let's say green tea ice cream, the thing is that it is palatable. If you've never eaten it before and you eat it for the first time, it's not entirely bad. It's just
no, it's
strange.
just a surprise.
Yeah, it's like it's bitter, not bitter. It's not sweet. It's not really salty. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's actually good. But it's weird,
Yeah,
but good.
that's one of the funniest things about any traveling, and we talked a little bit before we started the podcast about how important it is to travel and how
Yeah.
so many people across the world don't travel, and just the different things you take for granted or different things you assume are the way it happens everywhere in the world, and then you travel and you realize just how amazingly diverse and fascinating other cultures and other areas and other ways of doing things are, even as simple as what soft serve ice cream flavors should be.
Yeah, I think we have actually, I think a lot of thought has gone into a lot of aspects of Zero Leader. I think far more than most players would have realized. I mean, currently as we said, I've gone through the rulebook 3 times already, and it's not even formatted into its final, with the graphics and the pictures and examples all put in. This is just the raw text format, and I've already gone through it 3 times. So it's actually been worked out quite extensively. We've actually had a bigger than usual playtest group as well of diverse and experienced and inexperienced players giving it a go and giving their feedback. and all of that's still ongoing, So um, I mean, I've even tried, for example, using different variations of, for one of a better word, the names of the aircraft on the cards. So, in following the Starling Corsair leader, you would have, the F6 Hellcat, or the F4F Wildcat, or something like that, or SBD Dauntless, right? So, following the same format, you would have the, A2M, 0, for example, and or the KI 86 Frank, right? Frank or Oscar, right? So we would do that. And then I said, let's try what if we do it using the original Japanese name, the Hayabusa and the Hiei, and the, what would the player understand that? Would players get it if
Well,
it's, yeah,
that's one of the toughest things to I don't know how to describe that.
right? It's no, so I actually put it to what do you call it, a smoke test, right? So I just asked my playtest, we have a team of playtesters for a DVG, right? And I just put it to them and say, look, would you guys know the difference between one and the other if, you know if we call it the KI?
If we went by code names instead
Yeah,
of
if we call it the
designators.
KI-43 Hayabusa, would you know off the top of your
Yeah.
head what I'm referring to? And unless you actually knew it very well and you say, no, yeah, that's an Oscar, right? You probably wouldn't, but if I said the Oscar,
Most people, I think, would mess it up unless they are, and I hate to call them grognards, but unless there is a certain level of equipment knowledge that people would want to get to, I guess.
yeah, but even then, off the top of your head, you will not always remember that unless you are actually that fluent with, as a historian
Yeah,
or
with the
that
aircraft
interest, right? Because if I say, okay, can you give me the original designation for the Nell or the Betty or the
No,
Val?
oh
You're like,
gosh, I
who
should
who
know
would
those things. Yes,
who
exactly. My
would?
brain has to wrap
Oh,
itself around those.
yeah, it's I think it's the IGD3A, right? That's the,
Yeah.
in most, even I would hesitate to, like, I would have to search, you know.
Well,
So
it's like I was doing some Vietnam research last night, and I always have to wrap my mind around the fact that the AA-2 atoll is actually the K-13 or the R-3S, and that there's two designators for the same missile that I have one single U.S. designator for. So there's
yeah,
always that fun in any kind of wargaming.
yeah, the atoll, right? That's the NATO call sign, and then, and the
Right,
same thing.
exactly.
So we experiment with all of that, and then we said, "Hey, look, if we call this the Nakajima or the KI-43 or the Hayabusa, nobody would know what it means, like, But if you call it the Oscar and the Frank and, the Zero and the Vals and the Judys, not all players would know immediately what they are, but most players who have some passing knowledge of the
Right.
history, like, if you're just even passingly familiar with Coral Sea and Midway and, the Philippine Sea, you would probably know your different. You would know your Judy from your Val from your Bettys, um, because that's the commonly used name, right? So that was
Absolutely.
one of the, yeah, that was one of the things we actually looked at. Um,
Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about what might be in the DVG pipeline and some classic cardinal sins or trip ups of game designers as they are putting things through the editing process. And we're back. So we're going to talk about a couple things that have been seen out there in the wild on the DVG website and on Facebook. We know about Zero Leader. We know that there's a lot of work being put into that for the Kickstarter. We know there's currently expansions that will be delivered later on in the year, early next year, for other leader series, for IAF, for Zero, or for misspoke there, for B-17, for Phantom Leader. Also, there's Spruance Leader out there. Benjamin, you want to say anything about Spruance Leader and the work being done there?
um, I think at this moment, I'm just looking at what Dean is doing and just providing just a little bit of guidance and advice, but I think he's working through most of the shall we say, heavy lifting on his own right now, and I think he's doing a pretty good job of it. He gives quite regular updates and collates quite a bit of feedback from all the interested players. I think there's a lot of interest in that because Spurrent's leader really speaks to those of us who grew up in the Cold War, right? The shall we say the Red October, Red Storm Rising era
Exactly.
of war games, So it is true, right? You would speak to somebody from that time and we'll talk about, oh yeah, I remember 688s, and oh yeah, I remember hunting the Krivaks. The Krivaks was such a PITA, and you would instantly know
And
what I'm
a
talking
bunch
about.
of us were laughing. Yeah, we're laughing about playing Harpoon, and I think that it took me longer to read the rule book than to actually play some of the games until you tried to simulate something that, and I forget who was talking about it. Somebody on one of the podcasts was mentioning you could simulate an entire convoy crossing, and that's awesome because now you're going to play for 5 days just to get your convoy through all the Russian submarine blockades and surface ship actions, and yeah.
We did actually play. I did play Harpoon actually, the third edition, and we did actually play the Red October scenario at the end. So I'm just trying to recall. I think it's a couple of frigates and the Alpha hunting the Red October, protected by one LA class
Right.
and one, what's the other class? The old the older class from the 688
Right.
was retired. So we actually played through that, and it was actually brilliant because the player who was playing the Red October, it was she actually. This was in high school, and she actually captained the Red October like nobody ever did. She used
Excellent.
the what do you call it, the caterpillar drive, right? So like nobody could like figure out what the noise was, and they couldn't lock on it, and then she blew the tanks and went to the surface, and the Russian submarines were still hunting her, like, I don't know, in the second thermocline, and up on the surface the Red October is merrily sailing away into the sunset because she blew tanks and went to the surface, and for all the world looking like another like a tugboat or something. Anyway, yeah, that was brilliant. And I
Well,
remember,
and that's, I think we have a lot of memories of
yeah,
games like that from the
yeah,
1980s, 90s, and that whole era of force on force naval action.
yeah,
That it's interesting how some people have then tried to extrapolate that into the modern era, and it's tough to write the scenario or to write the kind of action that would do those things. So I think it's easy for us to fall back into the Cold War era, naval force on naval force, and kind of pine for that level of wargaming.
I think there's a lot of work we have to do now just to make sure it's accurate as well. So, if and especially if you want to do things like, okay, we're going to create I don't know, Red Storm Rising scenario, mid 80s, right? So, okay, mid 80s, USS Nimitz, right? Which carrier air wing was on the Nimitz? And then if somebody puts carrier air wing 5, like, no, carrier air wing 5 was never on the Nimitz at that time. Things like that. You just need to go in and make sure that, okay, if it's Nimitz off the top of my head, make sure the top hatters are there, or make sure the black aces are there, because that's, or the Jolly Rogers, the Skull Squadron, right? Because historically that's actually
You are obviously somebody that knows their naval aviation from that period way too much, which is
way too-
awesome.
Yeah, that's I think that's nostalgia. That's the time we grew up in.
It absolutely
the
is.
Cold War.
Yeah.
And I remember one of my classmates told me, one of my classmates told me, like, this amazing book is called Red Storm Rising, and just go look for it, buy it and read it, you'll love it. And I thought, okay, fine, whatever. Went to the bookshop, found it, bought it. It was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Went home, 6 o'clock, started reading it. Did not stop till 2 a.m. I kid you not. I finished it.
that's familiar.
Yeah, and like, okay, wow, it's already 2 a.m. really, and I didn't eat dinner. There you
I think
go.
that's the level of interest that some of us had during that
Yeah.
period in the what if the what if things went not the way the politicians and everyone was pushing it. What if somebody did cross the line? And I think even today there's a lot of nostalgia for that. With look at tabletop games like Team Yankee. So they've had to really delve back into a lot of 1980s and early 90s equipment that we forgot about, that people haven't modeled in 20 or 30 years. And go back and create a game system that really is based around, in a sense, ancient history, history that is long past. But what if we had to fight Team Yankee Soviets versus NATO and take that whole fight.
I mean, it's scary when you think, right, between now, where we are, and the time of the mid 80s, that passage of time that elapsed is about the same amount of time that elapsed between that time and the Second World War. It's about 35 years,
Absolutely.
right? 30,
Yeah.
35 or 40 years, right? It's around that. It's and you look back and wow, where did the 35 years go?
Yeah, I feel old when I look back and I go, those are some really cool pieces of equipment. I realize, yeah, those are seen as old by some standards. I was playing Team Yankee the other day with friends,
Yeah.
and we were laughing about playing, quote, upgraded M1 Abrams, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like the ancient first off the line Abrams that might actually have a night sight. I'm like, ooh, I can shoot twice per turn. I feel all important.
No,
So it's kind of funny when you look at that stuff compared
Yeah.
to what we model now for modern combat.
I mean, I remember the first time I saw the F-18 Hornet, at one of the air shows. I think it was actually a Royal Australian Air Force Hornet that flew all the way over, and I remember seeing like, oh wow, this is the Hornet the first time, and at the time was like mid to late 80s, so it was like just newly operational. Like the
Right.
F-35
Oh, yeah.
Lightning is to us now, like it's just only starting to become operational. And then, I think a couple of years ago they've already started retiring the Hornets, the first and second
Absolutely.
generation
Yeah.
Hornets. All that's left now are the Super Hornets, the third generation
Right.
Hornets. Right.
So
So
that's
yeah.
doubly frustrating for those that flew the F-18. You're like, you're retiring airframes that I actually have time in.
I,
You start
I,
really feeling old.
I mean, I remember seeing a report, in the Royal Australian Air Force. Somebody was saying there that the jet pilots now who come into the replacement training squadrons, that's where you train to fly the Hornet, right? Specifically, because you're already qualified on jets, but this is just to train you to fly the F-18s, and the airframes of these F-18 trainers that the pilots are in are older than the pilots themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And there's in the U.S. Air Force, there are 3 generations of pilots and with some people I know that have flown the B-52. So both they and their grandfathers have flown that airplane. And
yeah.
that's pretty amazing when you think about it, So an airframe that took us all the way through the Cold War and is still relevant and still being flown today in a variety of missions.
Because they won't build or design something like this now,
Yeah, and
I
you
suppose.
couldn't. I mean, even
Yeah.
if you wanted to try to design some kind of intercontinental bomber, there's too many technology constraints, too many of all these different things that you'd end up with a program as we joke about, like the B-21 program, that
Yeah.
you might as well build a space shuttle. It would probably be easier and less fraught with cost overruns and design overruns and people trying to put
Yeah.
10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag.
Yeah.
Unlike something like the B-52 where they're like, we just need a bomber that can drop a lot of conventional or can go one way with a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, cool. Well, we've been talking for a little bit under an hour. We've talked a lot about the Zero Leader. We've talked about editing. We've talked about a variety of different DVG game projects out there. But what I'd like to concentrate on a little bit is guidance that you have for budding game designers and for people that think, hey, I've got a really cool idea. Where should I take it? What should I do with it? Tell us a little bit what you think those game designers should concentrate on when they get ready to bring their idea, their project, their baby, in a sense, to someone like Dan and Kevin at DVG Games or any one of the major game houses. Where are those big slip-ups? What are the things that people traditionally get wrong?
Um, I'm just trying to think here, like how do you even answer a question like that? I think
Yeah,
if
there's
you
more
have
things
an
that you can do wrong than things that you can
yeah,
do right, I guess,
yeah.
is the tough part.
So I think it starts again with an idea, right? No, I want to make a game about the Peloponnesian Wars, right? So what's involved? Do your research, know your history. Above all, you have to be historically accurate, right? If it's a historical game. So, do your research, right? Start with an idea. Always try to have clarity around your idea. So you should know exactly what's going on with what you want to do at any given time. And if you've seen Dan's approach to designing games, right? He starts with the theme, he starts with the idea, he builds it up from there. And then once he has the narrative and the theme, I want to make a game about World War II Japanese, pilots flying off aircraft carriers, and it's got to be solitaire and it's going to have all of this. It's going to have targets. And, once you have that, then you start figuring how to turn all of that into game mechanics, right? So how do I want to represent the targets? How do I want to represent, we're going to have cards for, aircraft. Do I want to have separate cards for pilots and aircraft? Do we want to do that? Why do I want to do that? So you have to kind of work through, your idea of, in your mind, what you want to do, right? And then convert it to the mechanics. Then that's where the research and development part comes in. You have to play through and try and figure out what works best. You have to balance things. How do you want to represent the attacks? Throw a die. What die? D10, 2d6, 3d6. Like, these are all mechanics, right? These are all the details. You have to work it out. I think where most games get stalled is at some point what's the word for it? The excitement of designing it wears out a little, and you're down into the valley
Yes.
of darkness, and you just have to trudge through and work through all the things, because a game has 1,000,001 moving parts. You have to make sure all the parts interlock and work and do not jam you up, right? And you just have to work your way through all of that, and that can be quite tough. It is actually quite
Absolutely.
a hard block.
And it's not fun. I think sometimes everyone concentrates on the fun of crafting the initial mechanics and putting some of the historical background in. And then when you get to the grind of making sure your mechanics are all consistent and still are both narrative and easy to understand. And I can only speak this latest effort working on Vietnam playtesting for Blood Red Skies and trying to craft and build some rules in there. You find this never-ending set of, as I'll call it, whack-a-mole. You're out fixing one problem, and then when you do that, you break the interaction with another rule, so you have to go back and look at that rule. And it's very detailed work, and it's not a lot of fun sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's what makes for a fun and easy to play system that doesn't contradict itself.
Exactly. And I think if you're lucky enough to have people to support you, so as part of the DVG family, we all have each other to counsel, to advise, to support, to help get through. So you don't, so I know Chuck's going to go through his valley of darkness, but I'll tell him, you don't have to do it alone. You can give me some stuff to do. I can help you flesh out some things. By all means, write your rules in point form, please. You don't even bother being grammatical. Just work it out. You need to work this out and make sure it makes sense, it plays well, and then play test it, give it to your play testers. Don't even worry about it. Give it to me in point form. Give me 48 hours. I'll give it back in semi-complete sentences, and we go from there.
Yeah.
So if you're lucky enough, right, to have a support, you have people to help you, and we share the load, and we'll get through this together. We'll get through to the other side. It's happened. I've gone through the same thing myself. When Dan asked me, oh, we want to do a couple of expansions for Warfighter, like, do you have a couple of ideas you want to do? And I said, the two things I've absolutely wanted to do from the moment I discovered Warfighter is, one, I want to do something to do with the resistance, either the French or the Soviet resistance, and two, I want to do something about how the British Royal Commandos used to charge aboard the U-boats to try to save the boat from sinking and try to recover the Enigma machine and the code books.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do in Warfighter. And he says, what, go for it. Go do it. So I had to sit down from scratch and work out, okay, what we're going to do. I need French agents. Do I want to represent the SOE agents? And so actually, let me take a step back. So initially, when I pitched that, and I told Dan, like, I want to do a resistance, but I'm kind of thinking, do I want to do Soviet resistance or do I want to do French resistance? And then Dan gave me a look and says, the Eastern Front is probably a whole core box on its own.
Yeah, be careful what you start.
and okay, I'm not going to say any more about that, but there is stuff in the works. So, and I thought that's absolutely brilliant. The Eastern Front Warfighter, it is a whole box in its own, right? I'm just thinking the Siege of Stalingrad would be like, anyway, that would be like 6 million cards. Anyway, so, so I said,
that's a few too many cards even for me.
Yeah, so let's focus on that. So, and I worked through that, and I said, look, this is the flavor I'm going to bring to the marquee. statistically, the civilians will not be as powerful or as strong as the soldiers, your regular GIs or Marines, right? Statistically, they'll be, but they make up for that with a broad variety of skills. They have more stealth skills, they have more scrounging skills, they have more adaptability, because that's what the resistance did. And then when it came to designing the missions, like I'm thinking, let's have less frontal attack missions, let's have more. Again, what does the resistance do? We deliver underground newspapers. And that's so mundane. Why are we delivering underground newspapers? But that's exactly what the resistance did. That's the
Because
flavor,
it's a key
right?
part of it. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
the flavor. We want to smuggle the RAF pilot out. You
Yeah,
know,
everybody wants the big missions, the fancy smuggle the pot out, blow up the bridge, take out the Gestapo headquarters. But
um,
no, really, it's it's
but
not.
I actually snuck one in that I also secretly wanted to do, not so secret anymore, which is to blow up the railway gun.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we're talking, and in my mind I was thinking this is actually the northern part of France, close to Normandy. This is where the resistance cell is operating, and that's where the German rail guns would come along and try to shoot across the channel. Of course, in history, I think they never really worked because they were so complex. They would like fire once and then break down.
Right, right.
But but within the game, right, this is within the like, this is like Medal of Honor but on the tabletop, right? So I'm like, yeah,
Now we know where the real inspiration is.
so let's have the marquee go in, and and then I remember talking with Kevin. Kevin handheld me through that, and he said, okay, what kind of gear? And said, whatever they could find. So German guns, French guns, British guns, and how are we going to do that? We'll put two flags. We'll put the German flag on the German guns, and then we'll put the French Free Forces flag on all of them, for example. And we kind of worked through all of that. So for me, it actually showed that Dan was confident enough in Warfighter being such a sound and complete sandbox that we could now take innovative risks with it. So I did Maki, which was kind of a departure, at least in flavor. David Mackin, one of my co-designers, he went and built a whole expansion on Cthulhu, right? Relay, right? And then he built
Right.
one on Castle Frankenstein, and he with the articulated frames, the whole diesel punk feel of it. And Dan said, go ahead and do that. Go experiment with it, build it out, play it out, make sure it's tested, make sure it works, put it out. Let's see what the audience reaction is. And so far, it's actually been, I think, all positive. So now David has other things on his mind, and I have other things on my mind, and based on lessons learned. And but I went through my valley of darkness as well. I went through a phase where I designed it all out, and then everyone came and took it apart. Kevin
Yeah.
will look at it and say, this is wrong, this is broken, this doesn't
Yeah.
quite work, this is, and but that's okay, because all of this is what makes the game better. I actually I actually won't mind saying this. In one of my first conversations I had with Dan, probably about 2 or 3 years ago now, when Kevin asked me, like, would you mind helping us out with this rule book and that rule book. So I think the first two rule books I did was Corsair Leader, Down in Flames, Locked On, and then after that Pacific Warfighter. And along the way, he introduced me to Dan. I spoke to Dan, and I remember we talked a bit, and Dan said, what I want you to do is to make this perfect. And I remember thinking,
No small task
that's
there.
that's going to be our prime directive, right? Make the game perfect. And while it's more aspirational, I don't think it's a conceit to say that's something we aim for. That's something we strive for, and it's always frustrating. Like, we've gone over it. I've gone through the rule book like 8 times. Kevin's gone over it. Holly's gone over it. Dan's gone over it. I've given it to the playtesting group. They've gone over it. It's gone to print. It comes back. I open up the box, flip open the page, and there it is. There's that typo everyone missed. 15,
Playtest, or that's editing 101. Where you're like, how did we all of our eyes missed that? Well, that's how human brains work, unfortunately.
15 pairs of eyes missed it. But you know what? And then when I dig into it and I talk to them, we actually figured out how it got there. What happened? Oh, somebody went in and made a last minute fix after we
Right.
signed off on it. And like, okay, so from lessons learned, absolutely no more last minute fixes after it's been signed off, because
Exactly.
that's what gets you in trouble. But that's been my prime directive, like make the game perfect.
Well, that's a
maybe
good
not so
point.
not so much spare no expense, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's a good point to end on, because I think that it's a never ending series of revisions with an end state of perfection in mind that we all have to kind of get to, whether we're designers, whether we're assisting with playtesting or whatever, sculpting that finished product to be as good as it can be, and not just kick it out to the gaming world and go, we'll fix it with an errata, we'll fix it with FAQs, we'll playtest it once we release this idea.
No, I will tell you, when we find a typo, especially a silly thing that we missed, nobody is more frustrated with it than Dan himself. I remember,
Good.
I think this was Shadow War. I remember I found something. I pinged him, Dan, just to double check. There's this problem here on this card. Was this intended? And then, 2 seconds later, he pings me back. No, that was a typo. And then I ping him. Then I could hear your sigh all the way here across the across the Pacific.
Exactly.
I'm like, I can.
Across the ocean, I can hear it.
Yeah, so actually that's quite true. Nobody's more frustrated and nobody's more demanding than Dan himself. Even if he doesn't come out and say so. And I fully support that. Let's set the highest standard we can, and we strive towards that and do the best that we can. And the fact that he does spare no expense to produce all these upgrades and reprints for errata.
That's the thing that's always good to see a company invest in. Is reprinting it, putting it in the boxes, and getting it out.
Yeah,
there.
or if you have a problem with your game, you open up, there's a damage in the box, no problem with the cards. Email Sarah, she will send out a replacement, no questions asked.
Yep, Sarah is always willing to hook people up with that and make that make that problem
exactly. So I mean, look, the investment in supporting your customers, pays off, right? That's because
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for talking for an hour. We could carry on for quite a while. I know it's late where you are. My real world job is pinging me, so we're going to have to cut this one shorter than probably the listeners and I would definitely like to do. So we'll have to have you back on again. But thanks for taking the time to chat with us and talk about DVG Games, your work as the staff editor, and then a little bit of the insight to the behind the scenes. So we'll definitely have you back on another time.
Absolutely, my pleasure.